is Lauren Kimball with ANI 150, and today we're going to work on part of exercise 1, specifically modeling a 3D die. Now in class we already discussed how to model a can, and this is a supplemental tutorial to help you along with modeling the other portion of the assignment. So before we begin, we have to choose a primitive that best matches the subject matter. So in this case, it's going to be a cube because it's playing dice, right? So I'm going to go over here to my Poly Modeling tab, and I'm going to click on a cube primitive. All right. Now the next thing I want you to do is get into this cube's inputs. To access the inputs, when you first create a primitive, you can just press T on your keyboard. But I'm going to go ahead and turn that menu off by pressing Q. Q is just my select tool. You could really choose any tool, W, E, R, you name it, to make it disappear. What I'm interested in doing is accessing that same menu through the inputs listed in the channel box. This is the channel box. If you don't see it on the right side of your screen, it could be that you have the attribute editor open. Press Control A to toggle between the attribute editor and the channel box. Okay? When you see all of this information, translate, rotate, you know you're in the channel box. So I'm going to go down to Inputs and I'm going to click on Polycube. And right here is the same option set as pressing T. But here I can click all 6 of these at once, which I couldn't have done with the tool, which is why I wanted to access it through the channel box. And what I want you to do is click on width, height, depth, and all the subdivisions and enter in 10. Boom. All right, perfect. Now that I've got my base for modeling, I want to go ahead and bring in a reference. Now we talked about this in class with modeling the can, but you can import what's called an image plane, which is essentially an image that is attached to the camera you have in your active viewport. So I have the perspective view. I want to go ahead and bring in an image plane. So to do that, I'm going to go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. Now, before I began modeling, I went ahead and set my project, and I already put this die reference in the Source Images folder of my project directory. If you don't have access to this image from Canvas, you can just go ahead and go on to Google and type in like unfolded dice reference. This is just going to help us figure out where to cut the holes that our little divots are going to go into. So I'm going to go ahead and click Open, and that will put this reference image behind my object. No matter where I move, that image is going to stay put. Now, next step is it's kind of large and in the way right now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to View, Image Plane Attributes, and click on the attributes for this image plane. Right now, if I press on spacebar and open up all 4 of my viewports, you can see this image plane kind of appears in different ports at different places, and that's a little bit annoying. So first thing I'm going to do in my attributes is set the display to looking through camera, so that when I go to my other viewports, this image plane will not appear anywhere but the perspective camera that it's assigned to. Next, I'm going to scroll down to Placement, and I'm going to shrink down the size, maybe 0.5. Ah, that looks pretty good, 0.5. And then I'm going to go to the Offset options. Let's see, try typing in 0.5. Oh, that goes a little too far up. I'm going to change this to about 0.25, maybe 0.2. There we go. And I want to move it to my right, so let's try 0.2. Not quite far enough. 0.4. Yeah, maybe I'll shrink this down a little bit more by changing the size to 0.4, and then moving this 0.25. Maybe this to 0.5. Okay, so now I've got this cool little image plane in the upper right-hand corner of my screen, and it's always there, and I can move things in front of it. It's just a nice little guide. And again, I changed the size to 0.4. and the offset to 0.5 and 0.250, at least if you have this exact image that I'm using. You may have to toy around with the settings if you're using a different one. All right, so on my cube, I basically chose those particular subdivisions so that I could chop this up easily for these divots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top, and I'm going to treat this number 1 face as the top of my die. and I'm going to put it in face mode, and I'm going to go over to my toolbar and I'm going to select my paint selection tool. And this is just a really cool way to just select faces that you want. As you can see, I'm just going to press Control Z to undo that. And if you've selected this tool and you find the brush is really big, you can hold down the B key and shrink this down to your needs. But I'm going to use this tool, and I'm just going to select the innermost 4 faces. So there should be 4 faces below in a vertical line, and 4 faces above and side to side, right? 4 in the middle, and I'm going to press delete. Now, one thing that may or may not show up on your screen is this cool little heads-up display here. You'll notice that when I selected those 4 faces, that this little display actually showed me exactly how many faces I have selected. Now, the paint selection tool is really good for not accidentally selecting faces behind your object. If I were to use my regular selection tool and just marquee select this, if I press 4 on my keyboard, I can see that I've accidentally selected faces behind it. So to avoid doing that, I recommend turning on this display, the heads-up display. To access it, all you need to do is go up to Display, Heads-up Display, and activate the poly count. Okay, that's Display, Heads-up Display, poly count. All right, so I'm going to click off of that, press 5 to get back into shaded view. And I'm going to go ahead and just use this tool. That way I don't have to hold down Shift, and I don't have to worry about accidentally selecting anything behind my selection. All right, and press delete. I'm going to go down here, and this is going to be my 4-sided section, I suppose. I'm going to go ahead and go select an area that is both 2 in and 2 down. So basically you got this nice little 4 selection corner. I guess you could say like a border around where my divots are going to be that's about 2 cubes deep. So I'm going to go ahead and select those, go over 2 units, select 4 more, go down 2 units, and this grid is kind of getting in my way. If that happens to you, you can go to Show and turn off grid. Okay, so we go down 2 units, select 4, select 4 more. Okay, all right, and 4 times 4 is 16. I can see up here 16 faces. Perfect. Press delete. All right, so I'm going to move down another one, and this time it's going to be my 6-sided face. So I'm just going to select all these, because each one of these divots that I'm going to model or that I'm going to plug into these holes is going to be about 4 units wide. So we're going to plug into each of these squares a divot. So I'm going to go over here and select this area. All right, click delete. So I got 6, 4, 1, and I want to do 3 on this side. So just start selecting 3 sections. Oh, accidentally grabbed 1 too many. So if I hold down Control, I can unselect a particular face and delete. All right. Now I'm going to move this way. So I've got my 4-sided, my 1 side, and I'm going to go to this side with my 1 on top. And just select enough divots for 2. There we go. And delete. And now, moving on to 5, which is the last face. All right, excellent. So this is about ready to move on to the divot portion. I'm going to go ahead and press F8 on my keyboard, which puts it in object mode. And then I'm going to go up here and delete history, because that's pretty good for your scene hygiene. You want to delete history periodically. I also don't have any reason to have this reference up anymore, so I could either delete it or I could put it in a display layer. So I'm going to just use my selection tool and just marquee select this image plane. And then I'm going to go down here to my display tab. The display tab is inside the channel box, so if you don't see it, try pressing Control A to toggle over from the attribute editor. And although we covered this in likely should have covered this in class. I'm going to go ahead and touch on this here for those of you who might have missed it. You have four main buttons here for your display layers. These two with the arrows allow you to basically organize your display layers if you have lots of them, so that you can move them up and down the list. These two buttons create display layers. This one here with the plus sign will create an empty layer. The one with a ball on it will create a layer based on what you have selected. So I have this image plane selected, and I'm going to click the button that looks like a ball sitting on a piece of paper. Now when I do that, I've created a display layer that has the image plane in it. So I can double click layer 1 and name this layer image plane, and then toggle off the visibility. Now with the die, I can do something similar. I can go ahead and create a layer for that as well, because it's going to be helpful to turn that on and off from time to time. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and reactivate my grid temporarily so that I can basically see what I'm up to. And I'm going to start working on the divots, which are the little indentions on all the different sides of the die. I'm going to go ahead and click on sphere, because that is one of the closest shapes to a divot. And I'm going to go into the inputs and change all the subdivisions to 8. Now, if I were to turn this off or see through it, so, oops, press 4 on my keyboard, you can see that if you were to consider these little boxes as kind of being the same measurement of the cube, that this sphere does a perfect job of fitting within the little sections that we've cut out of our main die. So that's going to fit really nicely. And I've set this to 8 so that there's, matching vertices to combine to the main mesh. So we'll get to that in a second. I'm just kind of explaining what I'm up to. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to right click and click on faces, and I'm just going to select the top portion of the mesh and delete it. So now it looks more like a dice's divot. I'm going to go ahead and select it in object mode, which is F8, or you can just right click object mode to put it in object mode. I'm going to grab the scale tool, and I'm going to squish this down a little bit. Alright, now we talked about this in class a bit, but anytime you see in Maya a side of a polygon mesh that's solid black, that means that that side does not have any surface normals, on that side. So essentially with the polygon plane, you have one side that'll have a surface normal that tells Maya how light is supposed to appear on it. The other side does not have a surface normal, and so while it looks black in Maya, if you brought it into a game engine or you brought it into ZBrush, it just wouldn't be there at all. It'd be completely transparent. So unless we want our dice to have transparent holes in it, we're going to have to flip these normals. So I'm going to hold down the space bar, and I'm going to go to Mesh Display. So remember, the space bar activates your channel box, or not channel box, sorry, hot box, the hot box. So you press space bar, and you go to Mesh Display and reverse. Alright, and that's all you do to reverse the normals. Okay, next step, I'm going to go ahead and reactivate the die. I'm going to grab this little divot that I've created. I'm going to activate the move tool, which is W, and I'm going to hold down V. The hotkey V means snap to vertice. And I'm going to grab this on the Y-axis, which is just the green up and down arrow, and I'm going to snap this up so that it aligns cleanly with this hole. Now it might be helpful to actually be able to see the wireframe as we're working on this. If this helps you to turn on the wireframe when we don't have something selected, all you have to do is go to Shading and activate Wireframe on Shaded. And now, no matter what we have selected, we can see the wireframe, which can be helpful. Alright, so next, I'm going to turn off the die. I'm going to grab the divot. I'm going to right click and select the edge. And then I'm going to double click the edge loop around the rim of the divot. Then I'm going to grab my scale tool, hold down Shift, which will activate extrude, and pull these edges out. Now, you don't have to keep holding down Shift. Once you've started to pull the faces, you can let go of shift. Alright, let's turn that die back on. Alright, cool. Next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to right click and go to vertex mode. Now I accidentally selected the die as well, so I'm going to press F8, make sure I only have the divot selected, and select vertices. Okay? I'm going to grab this vertice that's closest to the corner for the divot, and I'm going to use my move tool to snap it into place. I'm not going to worry about this one. We're going to talk about that one in a second. I'm only worried about these corners. Alright, excellent. I'm also going to go ahead and turn the die off. Okay, so these corners are really all the geometry that we need. We don't actually need this other vertice that happens in the center portion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift right click. Whoops, gotta go back in vertice mode. Shift right click with vertice mode selected. If you accidentally go to edge mode or face mode, make sure you go back to vertex mode. I'm going to shift right click, go to merge vertices, and click on the target weld tool. So the target weld tool is pretty cool. You just click a vertice that you want to merge and you drag it over to the other vertice you want to merge to and let go. And it will not only merge those vertices, but it will also move the vertices. Perfect. Now when I turn on the die, I have a nice little divot that is ready to be combined and merged. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and delete the history on this, and then I'm going to get ready to start duplicating these divots over into the other holes that we made. So let's go ahead and start with side 5. Well, maybe side 4. It's really 5, yeah, 5. Sorry, I'm being capricious today. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by grouping this. So if I press W, you'll notice that the pivot point is in the center of our die. It's really right where we want it to be because it's aligned with the die surface, and so we're going to be able to snap that divot exactly where we want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and press Control G, and what this does is it puts my divot into a group, and a new group is always going to have a center pivot that aligns with the grid. So if you go over here to the outliner, and if you don't see the outliner, you can access it by pushing this button at the very bottom of the toolbar. You'll see that the divot is still its own standalone piece, but when I press Control G, it nestles it into this group, this invisible group. Alright, next, before I move forward, I'm going to activate what's called incremental rotation. So I'm going to go over to my rotate tool, which is E on the keyboard, and it's over here. You see the little arrow wrapped around the square on your toolbar to the left. I'm going to double click it to get into its tool settings. And then I'm going to activate what's called Step Snap, which is what allows you to do incremental rotation. So I'm going to click Reset Tool so that the tool is set the same way yours looks. And I'm going to activate Step Snap by clicking on Relative. And it's already set to 15 degrees, which works great. And then I'm going to close out. And so what I'm going to do, now that I have this grouped, is I'm going to press Control D, and I'm going to start rotating this, and you'll notice that it starts snapping in 15-degree increments. Now be careful not to hold down Shift, because as of, I think, Maya 2018, if you hold down Shift with the Rotate tool, it'll start cloning things, which can be helpful if that's what you want to do. And you could use clone as opposed to duplicate, but just be aware you don't have to hold down Shift to do incremental rotations. Alright? So once I've done that, I can select away from the group, click on this divot, and press Control D for duplicating. And then hold down my V to snap this. Ooh, there we go. Snap this into the empty hole. Alright, I'm going to do it again. Control D, hold down my V key, and just snap this over. Control D, snap this down. Control D, and snap this over. All right, now we have 5. So I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing, moving it over to the faces that have 4 holes. I'm just go 1, 2, 3, 4. If you want to select multiple things, you just hold down Shift, and then I'm going to press Control G and start rotating this over. Oh, I forgot to duplicate first. So I could either press Control D, which would duplicate this before I start moving it, or, like I had mentioned before, if I hold down Shift, it goes ahead and duplicates those, or clones them. Alright, now I've got 2, so I'm just going to grab these, and I'll go ahead and just use Control G to group, Control D to duplicate, so I don't want to keep holding down Shift, and move them over. And now I've got 3, so I'm going to go back to my 5 side, click on these, press Control G, and I'm going to go ahead and press Control D to duplicate and rotate these over. Alright, last I've got 6-sided face, so I'm going to go to my 4-sided face. Click on Q to deactivate the rotation tool so it's a little easier to see what you're selecting. And I'm going to go ahead and press Control D to duplicate, Control G to group, and I'm going to go ahead and rotate these, into place. Alright, now I still have 2 extra holes, so I'm just going to grab 2 of these, Control D, and use my snap vertice to move that into place. And now my die is almost ready. Now of course, right now if I select this, these are clearly not combined, so we're going to have to do that. I'm going to grab all my assets that I've created, and I'm going to Shift right click, oops, accidentally activated something. Do that. Alright, Shift right click, and that's our nice little shortcut menu, and click on Combine. And now we've got one solid mesh. Now inside of our outliner we can now see that this is one solid mesh, but we've got all these empty groups. Most of them were created during the construction portion, but some were created because I combined a mesh. So I'm going to go ahead and click Delete History, and it should, whoa, it wiped away all the groups. That was convenient. Okay, so it's really important, especially when you're modeling, to go back into your outliner periodically just to keep things tidy. Okay, in fact, I'll just go ahead and call this my die mesh. Okay, so we're not quite done yet. If I were to press 3, well, it's working out really well. So instead of pressing the smooth, I'm just going to go over here and show you. I'm going to go click on this vertice and use my move tool to show you that things are not quite complete yet. So what's happened is, even though we've combined all these assets, we have not essentially sewn them together by merging the vertices. So I'm going to press undo, and to merge these vertices, while in vertice mode, I'm going to select everything, Shift right click to get to that shortcut menu, go to Merge Vertices, and I'm going to go to the little box next to Merge Vertices. Okay? So I'm going to reset the tool. Okay, so this is how it should look on your screen. Essentially, to make sure that you don't accidentally merge things you don't want to merge, like for example, some of these divots might be pretty close together, and if I merge, or sorry, vertices, some of these vertices in the divot might be very close together, and if I were to just merge the vertice, things that we don't necessarily want merged might merge. So what I'm going to do is change the threshold to something really, really small, like 0.0001. And I'm going to go ahead and merge, and it will only merge the vertices that are like on top of each other, like right here around the corners of our divot. Now if you look up here to the vertice count in our heads up display, the moment I press merge, it drops considerably because these vertices have all been merged. And if I go over here and grab this corner now, it's all sewn up. Alright? Alright. So now I'm going to press 3 and turn off the wireframe. And it looks like this dice is going to look, or this die, sorry, singular, is going to look really good finished. So remember that if you look at this die with 3 pressed, it's only a preview of what it will look like smoothed. It's not actually smooth. So press 1 to get a real feel for what it is that your mesh looks like. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to name it High Poly Unsmoothed. And then I'm going to go ahead and make sure all my history is deleted, and I'm going to press Control D to duplicate it, and the duplicate I'm going to name High Poly _ Smoothed. So it doesn't look like there's a duplicate in the scene, but if I pull on this, you'll see that I duplicated. I'm going to take the unsmoothed version, and I'm going to go ahead and add it to this layer, the dye layer that we made, because you'll notice that it's the moment that we changed the mesh and merged all those vertices and combined everything, there's nothing in this layer anymore. So I'm going to grab this layer and I'm just going to call it High Poly Non-Smooth. And I'm going to right click with Unsmooth selected. I'm going to right click and add selected objects and turn it off. So now when I'm in my scene, there's only the one dye in my scene, the High Poly Smoothed. Okay? And now I'm going to smooth this. So I'm going to spacebar, mesh, or actually, you know what, let's use our shortcut menu. Shift, right click, and go to smooth, and click on the little box. Reset the tool. Alright, so this is what it should look like for you. Go ahead and change division levels to 3, and press smooth. And there is our smooth mesh. And that, I would not press 3 at this point because it might crash Maya, but this is what it looks like regardless of if you have smooth preview on or not. This is a fully smooth mesh. I'm going to grab it, and I'm going to create a new layer, High Poly Smooth. And now everything's nice and organized. So I'm going to hold on to this High Poly Non-Smoothed in case something goes wrong and I want to go back and fix something, because this is a lot easier to fix than this. Okay? So, next I need to create a low poly. So we talked in class about the pipeline, how usually you build a high poly mesh, and then you build a low poly mesh, and then you bake the details from the high poly mesh onto the low poly mesh, which is something we're going to be getting into in class later on. But we need the low poly mesh in order to bake all this onto. So I'm going to go ahead and create another cube. And this one, I'm going to go into the inputs, and I'm only going to change the width, height, and depth to 10. I'm not going to add all those subdivisions. Alright, next I'm going to soften these edges with as few vertices, or not vertices, as few edges or divisions as I could need. So there's like a ton of divisions on my smooth poly dye. I only want minimum on my low poly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, go to edge, select all these edges. I'm going to hold down my shift right click to activate that nice little shortcut menu, and I'm going to click on Bevel Edge. Now this doesn't look like our dye. We're going to have to go in and tweak the bevel options. Now remember, if you don't see this menu when it pops up, this is that little default set of inputs that come whenever you use a tool or first create a primitive. If it's not showing up for you, just press T. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is let's go ahead and change the fraction down to something a little more manageable, like 0.2. Okay, that's getting there. Let's up the segment so that we got something a little softer. That looks good. And maybe try 0.15. That's looking a little bit more like the dye. Let's go to object mode, move this over, kind of see how it looks with the high poly. Yeah, that looks pretty close. I think that's going to work. We can turn the high poly on underneath it. Yeah, it's looking good. Okay, now when we applied that bevel, obviously it kind of messed with some of the surface normals. We talked about this in class as well. So what you need to do is click on Edge, select the dye, shift right click into that shortcut menu, and we're going to go ahead and reset the surface normals by clicking on Soften Harden. Press F8, click off. Ooh, that's still looking pretty sharp. So let's try instead, grab the edge, and specifically ask for it to soften. Alright, click off. Oh, much better. Yeah, that's going to make for a better bake. Alright, let's go ahead and look at that smooth version again. Just kind of want to see, go to my side view. I just want to see how big a difference in like space there is between these two meshes. Yeah, I think that's not too far. You don't ever want like a huge chunk of distance when it comes to how far in or out the details are on the high poly mesh, because within a certain amount of distance the normal bake is going to break. So all I'm doing is just making sure that the surface isn't super far away from what the high poly has. It's very close. And this will make more sense in class when we discuss baking. So now we've got a nice low poly and a high poly. I'm going to grab this low poly, I'm going to name it low poly, delete its history, and I may go ahead and just create a layer for it. So low poly. Okay, and that's all you need for now. We're going to go ahead and talk about how to bake normals and build our textures and lay out our UVs and other tutorials. Thank you so much for tuning in with me, and yeah, I look forward to seeing you in class.